ni seorang nak dah tak biasa apa-apa bang Jangan biasa apa-apa.
Apa ya. Maknanya kalau tak guna just letak je lah kat sini kan.
Kalau macam akak tengok tak ada suara abang dulu di situ.
Signal dia je lah.
Kadang-kadang dua macam nama naik apa kan. Dua kena tengok akak.
Just apa ni je lah. Okey.
Okey kak.
Alright. Terima kasih. Okay.
Subhanallah, subhanallah, testing 1 2 3. Subhanallah, testing 1 2 3. Subhanallah, 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 testing 1 2 3.
Okay. Terima Tes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Cubaan suara 1 2 3. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat datang kepada tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, para hadirin. InsyaAllah majlis kita akan kita mulakan sebentar saja lagi. Sebelum tu ada beberapa peringatan ingin kami sampaikan kepada anda semua. Sebelum saya pergi kepada peringatan yang lebih terperinci, yang penting untuk pada pagi ini adalah majlis kita akan bermula sebentar saja lagi. Untuk itu kami mohon kurangkan, minimalkan pergerakan anda supaya kita dapat jalankan majlis ini dengan lancar. Yang keduanya, tolong matikan telefon bimbit ataupun letakkan telefon bimbit anda dalam mode senyap, insyaAllah. Dan sebarang arahan ataupun maklumat tambahan kita akan berikan dari semasa ke semasa. Sekian, terima kasih. Allahu Akbar. Kat tu. Oh, sini.
Weh, guna phone satu. Okey. Fazli, tolong guna phone jap.
Nanti baca doa sini.
Baca doa kat sini. Ustaz. Okay. Ustaz dah ada. Ustaz dah ada. Okey, dia dua kali baca doa lah.
Dia baca pagi kan tengah kejap lagi. Apa dia?
I can't give you anything but love, baby. That's the only thing I'm plenty of, baby. Scheme a while.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, para hadirin sekalian. Sebelum memulakan majlis pada hari ini, ada beberapa peringatan yang perlu dimaklumkan kepada anda supaya majlis kita dapat berjalan dengan baik dan lancar, insya-Allah. Antaranya, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, semasa majlis berlangsung, para hadirin dimohon untuk menukar mod telefon bimbit kepada mod senyap. Itu yang pertama. Yang keduanya, semasa VVIP masuk ke Dewan sebentar lagi, para hadirin diminta untuk berdiri bagi menghormati tetamu. Seterusnya, para hadirin juga diminta untuk terus berdiri bagi menyanyikan lagu Negaraku dan lagu Malaysia Bersih. Jadi untuk pagi ini kita ada dua lagu. lagu negaraku dan diikuti dengan lagu Malaysia Bersih. Kemudian dah selesai kedua-dua lagu tersebut, anda bersama-sama dengan tetamu kehormat dipersilakan duduk. Seterusnya kita juga memohon kerjasama daripada para hadirin untuk minimalkan pergerakan semasa pertandingan bahas berlangsung supaya dia tidak mengganggu majlis kita. Dan keduanya, pertandingan bahas ini juga dibawakan secara langsung melalui saluran Astro Awani channel 501. Jadi kita nak pastikan majlis kita nampak kemas dan teratur insya-Allah. Dan sekiranya kesemua peringatan ini dapat kita akur dan berikan kerjasama, insya-Allah majlis kita dapat berjalan dengan lancar. Sekian, terima kasih.
Ada. Hakim. Bukan. Hakim ke apa? Hakim tak announce. VIP je announce. Dia masuk. Ya. VIP announce. Tapi dia follow VIP. Timbalan ke?
Ni saya.
Ya, timbalan ke apa ni? Timbalan ni kan badan dia. Timbalan. Apa tu Haji Fatullah dia? Tuan Haji Fatullah timbalan.
Side of the street, can't you hear the pitter pat? Yeah, that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with my blues on parade, but now I'm not afraid, 'cause it's rover, it's crossed over. If I never have a cent,
Mengumumkan ketibaan Haji Muhammad Fatullah bin Muhammad Yusof, Timbalan Pengarah Bahagian Pengurusan Sekolah Berasrama Penuh, Kementerian Pendidikan Malaysia dan tetamu jemputan. Para tetamu diminta untuk terus berdiri bagi menyanyikan lagu negaraku dan lagu Malaysia Bersih.
bangsa, kita pikul bersama, jadikan Malaysia bahagia.
Para tetamu kehormat dan para hadirin dipersilakan duduk.
Hadirin dan hadirat sekalian, bagi memberkati majlis kita pada hari ini, majlis mempersilakan Al-Fadil Ustaz Muhammad Zuhairi bin Ahmad untuk memimpin bacaan doa. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A'udzu billahi minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Ya Allah, ya Tuhan kami merafakkan rasa kesyukuran kepada-Mu ya Allah, kerana telah mengizinkan kami untuk berada dan menghadiri Pertandingan Akhir Bahas Piala Perdana Menteri kali ke-46 bagi tahun 2019. Ya Ra'ufu ya Wadud, sesungguhnya pada hari ini kami berkumpul bagi menghubungkan silaturahim, bertukar-tukar pendapat di samping menyumbangkan buah fikiran dalam membentuk generasi yang berguna pada masa akan datang. Ya Allah, berkatilah usaha kami ini ya Allah. Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Rabbal Alamin. Engkau perbaikilah akhlak kami dan akhlak anak-anak didik kami ya Allah. Engkau hiasi kami dengan akhlak-akhlak yang baik dan terpuji. Juga hindarilah kami dari sifat-sifat yang keji ya Allah. Hindarilah kami dari sifat lalai yang merugikan dan bimbinglah kami ke jalan kebenaran. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, Ya Dzal Jalali wal Ikram. Jadikanlah kami orang-orang yang mendengar kebaikan, lantas bersegera melakukan kebaikan. Dan jadikanlah kami orang yang mendengar dan mengetahui keburukan, lantas bersegera menghindarkan diri dari keburukan. Kurniakanlah kepada kami, ya Allah, kekuatan fizikal, kecerdasan mental, kemantapan rohani, agar kami dapat menempuh ujian yang mendatang daripada-Mu, ya Allah. Berkatilah usaha kami, ya Allah. Mudah-mudahan dengan usaha kami ini akan menjadikan sekolah-sekolah kami cemerlang dan sekolah-sekolah kami sekolah berasrama penuh yang disegani dan dihormati sama ada dalam bidang akademik maupun dalam segala bidang. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Terima kasih Al-Fadil Ustaz Muhammad Zuhairi Ahmad atas pimpinan doa sebentar tadi. Semoga majlis kita dirahmati Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Sebelum kita teruskan majlis, di sini ada satu pengumuman. Diminta kerjasama pasukan sedar. Diulangi, diminta kerjasama kepada pasukan sedar. Sila penuhkan ruangan yang ada di hadapan terlebih dahulu. Sekian, terima kasih.
Bersanggul rambut cemara bujur, penghias diri ayunya putri. Salam disambut, mesra dihulur, kunjungan tuan majlis berseri.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Yang berbahagia, Tuan Haji Muhammad Fatullah bin Muhammad Yusof, Timbalan Pengarah Bahagian Pengurusan Sekolah Berasrama Penuh, Kementerian Pendidikan Malaysia. Yang berbahagia, pengarah-pengarah bahagian Kementerian Pendidikan Malaysia dan pengarah-pengarah Jabatan Pendidikan Negeri. Yang berusaha, barisan kepimpinan pengetua-pengetua Sekolah Berasrama Penuh. Yang dihormati para tetamu jemputan, tuan-tuan, puan-puan, para pelajar dan hadirin sekalian. Selamat datang ke Pertandingan Akhir Bahas Piala Perdana Menteri kategori Bahasa Inggeris kali ke-46 tahun 2019.
Para hadirin sekalian, Pertandingan Bahas Piala Perdana Menteri merupakan satu pertandingan yang berprestij bagi warga sekolah berasrama penuh. Tahun ini, sebanyak 69 buah sekolah berasrama penuh dan Maktab Tentera Diraja telah mengambil bahagian dalam peringkat kebangsaan yang telah diadakan dalam dua pusingan, iaitu pusingan awal dan pusingan akhir. Pusingan awal ini diadakan secara serentak di 4 lokasi berbeza pada 15 hingga 17 Mac, iaitu di Sekolah Menengah Sains Kepala Batas Pulau Pinang bagi Zon Utara, Sekolah Menengah Sains Pasir Putih Kelantan bagi Zon Timur, Sekolah Menengah Sains Alam Shah Kuala Lumpur bagi Zon Tengah dan Sekolah Menengah Sains Rembau Negeri Sembilan bagi Zon Selatan. Manakala pusingan akhir pula diadakan di Sekolah Menengah Sains Rembau yang berlangsung pada 17 hingga 21 Jun 2019 bagi memilih pasukan yang bertanding pada hari ini. Dalam pertandingan akhir bahas bahasa Inggeris ini, para hadirin akan menyaksikan kebolehan dan kehebatan putra-putra dari The Malay Kolej Kuala Kangsar. Dan juga putra-putra dari Kolej Islam Sultan Alam Shah.
Hadirin sekalian, sebelum kita memulakan pertandingan, dipersilakan para peserta perbahasan, penjaga masa, panel hakim dan Tuan Speaker Dewan, Pertandingan Akhir Bahas Bahasa Inggeris Piala Perdana Menteri tahun 2019 untuk mengambil tempat masing-masing. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan. Untuk makluman para hadirin, acara pada hari ini disiarkan secara langsung di Astro Awani saluran 501. dari Dewan Merdeka PWTC Kuala Lumpur dipersembahkan Pertandingan Akhir Bahas Bahasa Inggeris Piala Perdana Menteri tahun 2019.
Ladies and gentlemen, and now the moment that we have all been waiting for has arrived. To proceed with today's debate, I'd like to call upon the Honourable Speaker, Ms. Putri Mahira Ahmad Mizanuddin, news presenter from Bernama News Channel, to take the floor. Please welcome.
Thank you so much, Madam MC, Puan Azu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to distinguished adjudicators, honourable guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the floor. This House will now come to order. Welcome to the final of the 46th Prime Minister's Challenge Trophy English Language Debate 2019. The motion before the House today is that this House would call China's economic expansion as neo-colonialism. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm quite sure that everyone present here is excited for the debate to begin. But before that, allow me to first introduce our esteemed line of adjudicators. Our panel of esteemed adjudicators is led by Dr. Mizan binti Muhammad, the Director of International Islamic University Malaysia, World Debate and Oratory Center, I1 IIUM. Next, we have Mr. Fariz bin Zahir, the Head of Legal Department, Project Lintasan Kota Holdings, Sdn Berhad, Pro Lintas. Also on the panel is Madam Azura Ilya binti Ahmad, Senior Lecturer, teaching English as a Second Language or TESOL from Education Faculty, University Technology Mara, UiTM Shah Alam. Our next adjudicator is Dr. R. Siva Bala Naidu, Head of School, Pre-University Studies, Taylor's College. And last but not least, Ms. Nur Afifah binti Muhammadiyah, the Director of Lean In Malaysia and Governance and Sustainability Consultant. And to keep our debaters on their toes today is our timekeepers, Mr. Nick Zarif Imran bin Nick Marzuki and Ms. Ilyana Marsha Adriana binti Harold Kifli. And now, on my right and left, we've got both of the finalist teams, so let's get to know them better. Let me introduce to you the speakers from the government team, represented by the Malay College Kuala Kangsar, MCKK. The first speaker is Muhammad Mikail bin Taufik, a Form 3 student who hails from Kuala Lumpur, and he aspires to be a CEO.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the finals of PPM English Debate.
The second speaker to his right is Muhammad Luqman bin Muhammad Nawar, a Form 5 student who hails from Kedah, and he wants to be an economic analyst.
Assalamualaikum, and a very pleasant day I bid to all.
The third speaker on the government team is Adil Arif bin Luqman, a Form 5 student who hails from Kuala Lumpur and aspires to be an accountant.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning I bid to all. To my fellow debaters, let's have a great day. And to my audience, please enjoy the show.
And of course, supporting the team from the reserve seat is Hilman Irfan bin Hilmi, a Form 4 student from Selangor, and he wants to be a diplomat. So we've got to know the government team from MCKK. Now on my left is the opposition team, represented by Kolej Sultan Alam Shah, Kisas. The team is headed by the first speaker, Abdul Muiz bin Ahmad Sabri, a Form 5 student from Perlis, and I can see how eager he is to start today's debate as he wishes to be the Prime Minister. Next, we have Danish bin Zuhairi, a Form 5 student from Kota Baru, Kelantan, and he wants to be the Secretary General of the United Nations, UN.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and let's have a great debate for all today.
To his left, we have the slayer of the team as the third speaker, Ahmad Luqman bin Muhammad Noor, a Form 5 student from Shah Alam, Selangor, aspiring to be a biomedical engineer.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a little story. Last year I was also in the final stage, also with MCKK, but standing as the timekeeper. This year, I'm standing as a debater.
And supporting the team as the reserve speaker is one Ahmad Nabil bin Muhammad Hani, a Form 4 student from Bandar Baru Bangi, Selangor, with the ambition of being an engineer. Right, we've all gotten to know the gentleman on the stage today. So before we proceed, allow me to brief everyone present of the rules and guidelines to observe in the course of the debate. Members of this august House, before we delve further into the substantive speeches, allow me to brief everyone present on the rules and guidelines that we all should observe. Debaters are not and under any circumstances allowed to mention any sensitive issues that touch on race, religion, or any personal issues that may offend, humiliate, or embarrass any parties, be it debaters, adjudicators, or members of the floor. The use of Quranic verses and hadiths to support the team's arguments is prohibited at all times. The first speakers of each team will be given 8 minutes to speak. The second and third speakers of each team will be given 8 minutes to speak. The third debater from both teams shall not introduce any new arguments. Their role is mainly to rebut. For the first speakers of each team, the bell will be rung once, after the first minute, and at the end of the 7th minute. The bell will be rung twice, at the end of the 8th minute. For the second and third speakers, the bell will be rung once, after the first minute, and at the end of the 7th minute. The bell will be rung twice, at the end of the 8th minute. While the debaters are speaking, the opposing team can offer points of information or POI. The debater may accept or decline them. A POI may be offered by a member of the opposing team from the 2nd minute to the 6th minute for the first speakers and from the 2nd minute to the 6th minute for the second and third speakers. POIs are not allowed during the first and final minutes of the speech. A bell will be rung to signal the beginning and the end of the time allocated for POIs. A limit of 15 seconds is allowed for each POI. Offering and taking POIs should be done politely. A debater is required to raise his hand and to stand when putting forth a POI. Rude, abusive, or aggressive behavior in both instances will lead to deduction of marks. After the end of the substantive speeches, the debate will take a break of 3 minutes for the teams to prepare their reply speeches. Each team will then be given 4 minutes to deliver their reply speech, with the opposition's reply speech being delivered first, followed by the government's. During the reply speech, the timekeeper will ring the bell once at the 3rd minute to signal that the debater has 1 minute left. At the end of the 4th minute, the bell will be rung twice to signal the end of the debate. No heckling or harassment or barracking is allowed at any time during the debate. A debater must give or take at least 2 POIs during the course of the debate. No POI may be offered during the reply speech. So are we all clear of the rules and guidelines, guys? All right? And are you ready to start the debate? Good. Now, without further ado, I would like to call upon the first Speaker of the Government, Mr. Muhammad Mikhail, to deliver his speech and open the case for the government on today's motion. This House would call China's economic expansion as neo-colonialism. Please welcome Mikhail.
All over the globe, there are economic downturns, civil unrest, and infrastructural ruin. It's clear that a dark cloud has enveloped the world, and I believe that the name of this dark cloud is China. But before I continue into my speech any longer, firstly, I would like to bid Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Firstly, I would like to bid to the Madam Speaker, honorable panel of adjudicators, worthy adversaries on-site opposition, loyal comrades on-site government, not forgetting the meticulous timekeepers, and everybody joining us for this August debate in this amazing hall today. As Prime Minister, I will be doing multiple things in my speech. Firstly, I'll be setting up the whole framework for this debate in general by starting out giving our two objectives on side of government and also characterizing what the real world looks like before moving on to my one point of argumentation on how China is exploiting vulnerable countries. Now, I would like to clarify our burden. In order to win this debate to you, judges, we believe that we have to do two things. Firstly, we have to prove to you why China's economic expansion is without doubt and by definition neo-colonialism. And our second burden is that we believe that we have to prove to you that why we as the international community must call out China and acknowledge its actions as something that can be defined as neo-colonialism. Before moving on to my argumentation, I would like to clarify what does China really look like these days. First of all, to understand China, you have to look a bit into its history. Firstly, China wasn't always an economic superpower. 4 decades ago, 88% of its population was in poverty. But now, because China is an economic superpower, they want to show its prestige on the world stage. And the way they do this is that they want to execute international projects. As you can see, firstly, through the Belt Road Initiative. The Belt Road Initiative is a network of trade routes that connect countries all the way from the Middle East into China, and it even passes through Malaysia through a sea route. Basically, it's a $1 trillion project aimed to facilitate trade towards China and show the rest of the world that China is a new monster on the world stage. One more way China wants to show its dominance over the world stage is that it tries to, quote-unquote, help countries by investing in African countries and giving out loans to African countries. So I would like everybody in this hall to be informed that most of this debate will be taking part in those countries that are helped by China, specifically those African countries and countries that are involved in the Belt Road Initiative. Without further ado, I would like to start my first point of argumentation on how China's economic expansion is by definition neo-colonialism. Before we move on, my first level of analysis is basically clearing up the criteria and what really sets the difference between colonialism and neo-colonialism. We believe that colonialism, usually in the dictionary and by popular definition, is the act of an invader country entering a victimized country and basically taking the resources blatantly. It's like Japanese troops coming into Malaysia to take over the country, or British Empire stepping on Africa in order to extract the resources. But this type of colonialism ended a century ago. Now we have neo-colonialism. We believe that neo-colonialism is basically influencing countries through numerous methods in order to get resources. But at the end of the day, colonialism and neo-colonialism share one thing. It's about taking resources that aren't yours. We believe that neo-colonialism still stands as colonialism, but it's just a disguised attempt. We believe there's not much difference, and we still believe that it's something harmful and horrible for any country to participate in, China or any other country. So this brings me to my first point of argumentation. But before I move on, sure.
If neo-colonialism means that you're simply taking resources from other countries, please explain how that isn't the same as a country trying to economically develop in the world.
Thank you very much for the input, Government Whip. But that actually brings me right into my first argumentation. So thank you. My first argumentation is going to explain about the 3 criteria in which that we want to make sure and we want to define how China is actually participating in neocolonialism. Our 3 criteria are as such. These criteria basically stand on the exploiting of vulnerable countries, but how do they exploit those countries? We use these 3 criteria. Firstly, exploit these countries economically. Secondly, exploit these countries politically. And lastly, exploiting these countries culturally. I'll be going through these points one by one in my speech so that all of you will be able to understand better. So for my second point of analysis on how China is exploiting these countries economically. So China likes to invest in developing countries, right? Because they see developing countries as the next big thing, as the next China. So the way they want to do this is by giving out loans. The problem is they give out loans to countries that are really poor. The Central African Republic, Uganda, Sri Lanka. These are countries that have barely any economic power. And as of such, they aren't able to pay back those loans. So when they can't pay back those loans, suddenly China says, oh, we have to take your port now. We are going to take over your land. This is what's happened to Sri Lanka. When Sri Lanka couldn't pay back its $2.9 billion loan to China, China took away its most important port. That port was central towards the job opportunities of the people and the economic growth of Sri Lanka. We believe that it's horrible for China to do this, and we believe that it's horrible for side opposition to even try to defend China for doing this. So this brings me to my second level of analysis on how China is exploiting countries politically. So China awards countries with a lot of projects. China tries to start projects in different countries. For example, in Vietnam, they try to build a power plant, or in Malaysia, they're trying to build the East Coast Rail Line. But the way that China awards these projects, we believe is something that's very unfair. This is because China tends to award projects to countries that tend to stay loyal to them. For example, countries that say that we support China in whatever they do, we believe that it's those countries that will get the projects at the end of the day. And we believe that is horrible because at this point, that's China politically manipulating countries to vote for them. We think that this isn't fair at all because basically you're forcing those countries to stand with you for the sake of money, for the sake of the quality of life of people. You're holding those countries for ransom. It's horrible. Please sit down. I already took your POI just now. Now, this brings me to my last level of analysis, how China is exploiting countries culturally. So one of the ways China is expanding is less subtle, but we believe that this is still extremely important and it's still horrible at the end of the day. Because how does this work is that when multinational corporations from China, companies from China begin to work in other countries for projects, for example, Chinese workers going to Serbia to build a rail line there, when these workers go there, we believe that China tries to force their culture on the people of Serbia. For example, China tries to pressure other countries to open up multi-language workshops or tries to pressure workers that work with Chinese workers to learn Mandarin. And we believe that this has a harmful effect because in countries like Laos and Cambodia, people are starting to see China as a superior culture. Therefore, they start to teach their children, instead of learning their traditional Khmer or Lao language, they start to learn Chinese instead. They start to learn Mandarin instead. They abandon their original culture for the sake of money. We believe that China is pushing their culture upon these people and ripping away the national heritage that these people are so proud of. We've already told you, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, on how that China is exploiting countries 3 ways: economically, politically, and culturally. And every time they do this, they're taking away the resources, they're taking away the identity of countries. We believe that is horrible. And I would like everyone in this room to acknowledge, especially side opposition, that China has become an impending threat. And I believe that everyone should realize it. Because of this threat, we can no longer stay silent. We can no longer just sit down because we know that there's impending doom and we must defend ourselves for the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mikhail, for the opening speech of the case from the government. And in life, as a person, Mikhail idolizes none other than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and also Warren Buffett. Right. To open the case for the opposition and counter the arguments from the government, I shall now invite Mr. Abdul Muiz to deliver his speech. Please welcome.
Madam Speaker, China is a global economic superpower. But understand that China has never always been the global economic superpower. Inherently, they are not. 30 years ago, China was a country with false economical state. It was incredibly unstable with high rates of poverty. However, this changed 30 years ago after China opened their borders to foreign direct investments and they were able to develop themselves, and because of that, they became the global superpower that they are now. What do we stand for here as opposition? We stand with the fact that China's economic expansion should never be called neocolonialism, because I will explain to you later in my arguments. Before I proceed, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Standing here, proudly representing opposition, I'll bring to you 3 things in my speech. Number 1, I'll be giving a reply to the case set up by government. Number 2, I'll be giving my layers of rebuttals to the argumentations they gave. And finally, I'll give to you my arguments proving why is it that China does not exert power over these nations. And why is it that the economical expansion of China does not equal to neocolonialism. Standing my second speaker, he will be rebutting all of the argumentation given by the government while also proving his arguments on why is it that economically China does not exploit these countries at all. Standing my third speaker, he will be rebutting all of the arguments given by the government and deconstructing that case to prove why is it that opposition stands in today's debate today. Let's begin my speech with the case set up by the government. How did they characterize neocolonialism? They characterize neocolonialism as fundamentally you taking resources from other nations that are not yours. We concede to that. However, they were unable to cater to another part of neocolonialism, which is they were able to exert power over other nations. This is the other part of neocolonialism that they could not cater to. That is to say that the 2 common features that neocolonialism has is number 1, they exert powers over the nation, and number 2 is the exploitation of resources. We do concede to that. So why is it justified that we want to bring our metrics in terms of exertion of power over these nations? Because understand that the word neocolonialism was first introduced when European countries went to Africa, took their resources, deprived them of their resources, while also influencing them politically to exert their power over them. These are the 2 criteria that we need to cater to in this debate today, because that is what history proved to us, and we think that that is the common case of neocolonialism. Another part of economic expansion that they told you, they gave you the example of the BRI, known as the Belt Road Initiative. They told you that it's just China trying to show that they're the global superpower. We say that is wrong. What China wants with the BRI is that they want to open up a market for China to sell their products. The fact that to do this, China needs to develop these other nations, because only when these other nations are economically developed can they actually buy China's products. It is not just to show that China is a global superpower. Okay, that is before I begin, yes.
My Prime Minister just quoted that Sri Lanka has to give China their largest port for 99 years. Is that not economic influence under your side?
Right. In terms of the example of Sri Lanka, I will give that in my rebuttals later, which I will actually do now. So what is it that I will do in my rebuttals right now? 3 parts here. I will rebut the criteria that they gave in terms of economically, politically, and culturally, where I will rebut Sri Lanka in terms of economically, where they give loans. Right. So first part here. When China gives loans to these other nations, it is not just to take them, put them into debt, and then take their resources and take all of their land. We don't think that is true. What China does to give out these loans is to develop those lands, like I told you, to actually give them a better financial equality such that they can buy China's products. Now, to rebut the example of Sri Lanka, let me tell you why Sri Lanka is unable to become an example in today's debate. Because understand that in the first case, to develop that port, it was Sri Lanka's own initiative. The fact that they wanted to develop that port, they asked first India for loans, but India never gave them because India didn't believe that they had economical benefits there. So Sri Lanka asked China for these loans, and China weighted the cost and benefits analysis, and they said that, yes, we believe that if we were to develop that port, then Sri Lanka can develop economically because that is what we want. That is what China wants. So what happens there is that China gave Sri Lanka loans and investments to actually develop that port. However, the problem here is that at that time, Sri Lanka had a very corrupt government. So even after China developed the port in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka was never able to use that port economically to their benefits. Thus, they were never able to actually gain their profits. Because of that, they were unable to repay the debt that China gave them. We see that it's actually justified for China to take those land, to take that port, because in terms of investment and trade, in terms of investment and loans, if you are unable to repay your loans that you gave, we think that it's justified for you to take the collateral that were given to you. And because of that, we believe that it's justified for China to take that land, because it was never China's fault that Sri Lanka could not repay them for their debt. Second part, in terms of manipulating votes in the UN Assembly, let me tell you why this is actually not true. This is not true because for these smaller nations, such as African nations, even if they were to vote for China, understand that in the UN Assembly, there exists this form of discrimination. The fact that these smaller nations, even if they want to voice out their opinion, they cannot. Why is it? This is because they are economically unable to do so, and we believe that China is justified to develop them, because through that, China will be able to actually help these countries, and because of that, it is far better. Third part, in terms of manipulating culturally, we don't think China forces anyone to actually manipulate culturally, because to learn Mandarin, like they said, that they would throw away their culture, to throw away their culture, start learning Chinese language. We don't think that is a form of neocolonialism anyway, because it gives no form of exertion of power, it gives no form of exploitation at all. Because to learn Mandarin, anyone can learn Mandarin. It's not exclusive to just China pressuring everyone to learn Mandarin. Now let's move into my argumentation to prove why China does not exert power over these other nations. This is because China wants allies rather than colonies. Why is it that my argumentation is incredibly important? This is because my argument will prove to you why is it that China's economic expansion does not fit into the criteria of neocolonialism, which is exerting power over these other nations. Now, let's move into the second part of my argument, or why is it that this is true that China wants allies rather than colonies. First of all, let's understand the concept of exertion of power over these smaller nations. This is because this can only happen between two forces that interact unilaterally. That is to say, that if China and other nations were to interact unilaterally, the fact that other nations were never even given alternatives to their choice, we say that is a form of neocolonialism. However, let me prove to you, why is it that China does not have unilateral benefits? Why is it that China does not have unilateral communications with other nations, but rather they have multilateral and also bilateral? Before I begin, I'm sorry. Okay. So, why is it that China has multilateral and also bilateral? This is because, let me tell you the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative was to reform the trade route of the world and to actually connect all of these smaller nations such that they can trade better among themselves. We say this is a form of multilateral interaction between these smaller nations, because this happens when countries such as Kazakhstan, countries such as Pakistan can interact with each other better. They don't have to waste their costs on transportation and things like that. That is in terms of multilateral. Now, in terms of unilateral, why is it that China does not force other people to follow what they say? This is because in terms of China investing in Africa, there exists the China-Africa Cooperation Summit. What is it that China does in the summit? China discusses with African nations what is it that they want. They discuss economical policies and things like that to actually have a consensus. This proves that China and other nations do not force each other to actually do so. This proves that they are actually on the same level, and because of that, China does not exert any form of force over other nations, that China cannot force any other nations to do what is it that they want, because China wants better economical development for these other countries. And because of that, let the motion fall, ladies and gentlemen. We are proud to oppose the motion today.
Ladies and gentlemen, we might be looking at Malaysia's youngest Prime Minister in the future. So we're waiting for you to stand for elections, yeah, Muiz? Thank you so much for the speech. And now to steer the debate forward, I now call upon the second Speaker of the government, Mr. Muhammad Luqman, to deliver his speech. Please welcome Luqman.
If you look at a world in hindsight, you will find out a lot of new things. There's a new highway in Pakistan, there's a new speed railway in Kenya, and there's a huge seaport in Sri Lanka. But we have to ask the question, is everything big necessarily good? Government responds with another question. Who lies behind this mass of development and success, but they are in motion falls under side of government. We think the perpetrator is China. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to speak. I bid well to the panel of adjudicators defining the future of global geopolitics, members on side of opposition, those loyal to a lost cause, brethren on side of government, standing steadfast with me in defending what's best for the people, not just what's easy, and everybody present in this majestic parliament. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, Assalamu alaikum, and a very pleasant morning I bid to all. In this short period of 8 minutes, I'm going to do several things. Number one, I'm going to deliver several responses to the speaker before me. Then I'm going to move on to present my argumentation entitled, Why Calling Out China for Neo-Colonialism is an Obligation That Must Be Fulfilled. Without wasting any more time, here are several responses to the speaker before me. The first thing that they wanted to refute was on the definition of neo-colonialism, because an extra criteria that they added to this debate was as long as China is not able to exert power towards other nations, therefore it is not considered neo-colonialism. But note that they conceded to both our criteria, cultural imposition as well as political manipulation. The only rebuttal that I had towards that was to disapprove most of our facts. If that's your problem, don't worry, we have other facts to support our case. The first thing that I have to refute under their side is that they can't assume side of government to support traditional colonialism, because we're not going to prove to you that China is going to physically come into Africa and use their military force to invade them. But new colonialism can be simply defined as a new form of colonialism, rather subtly and not directly. Given that, what is the burden on the side of government? Let's clear that up. The first thing that we will prove to you is that we check all the three criteria of neo-colonialism: political manipulation, economic dominance, and cultural imposition, in which they ask the question, are we really exerting power? Let's just point out that Leader of Opposition left a lot of my arguments from Prime Minister clearly unresponded. The fact that China's loans are used as an advantage in which China can control economic decisions made by smaller countries. The fact that China explains themselves in a very sophisticated manner to smaller countries by imposing their culture. They refuted our examples. Here are other examples. If Sri Lanka wasn't something that they want to take, it's all right. In Pakistan, a port was opened in Gwadar, made under the Belt Road Initiative, and that is now under a 40-year lease in China. Have a seat, I'll take you later. Other examples is that China gives out loans to military regimes like Thailand, to countries rid by corruption like Azerbaijan. The difference between China and the IMF or the World Bank is that China specifically targets countries that can't pay back, countries that are ridden with conflict because they want to trap them politically and economically. The third thing that I want to refute, coming from side of opposition, was that they contest that culture is something that we should mix together and integrate. It's not harmful if someone in Cambodia learns Chinese. I agree, the integration of culture is beautiful. Malaysia is built upon the integration of three main cultures and other side cultures. But the difference in this case is that China is forcefully, coercively imposing their culture on others. I don't think that the building of specific workshops that force workers to learn Mandarin is cultural integration. I don't think that when there is a drastic increase of people in Cambodia speaking Chinese instead of their national language, that is not cultural integration. That is cultural imposition and attack that China uses on smaller nations. Before I move on to my point of argumentation,
Okay, two things that you have to prove. Firstly, prove how they are forced to learn that culture rather than simply having a choice. And secondly, you talked about how unfair China's loans are. Please note and realize that China's loans doesn't have any interest rate. So please prove how that is fair in that case.
Exactly. The fact that Chinese loans do not have interest rates and do not have specific guidelines as to what criteria should a country follow in order for them to receive a loan makes it easier for China to use their predatory tactics to target countries that can't pay back. I don't see a logic in that. Before I move on to my argument, let's clarify one thing left to clear on the side of opposition. Their criteria of not being forced is that you have another option. As long as there is a viable option that you can go to, that means their power is not exerted. But side of government would like to differ. That being forced doesn't mean opting into one motion or one option only. The fact that your choices are decreased and there is a tendency for you to go towards one choice which is forced by China, that in itself is forcing. Having 5 choices might seem like an option, but if China compels you to go to one choice only, that is still coercion, and force. Here's my argumentation. Why calling out China for neo-colonialism is an obligation that must be fulfilled. Before I go any deeper, let's understand the significance of this argument. Prime Minister told you why China's economic expansion is similar to neo-colonialism. I will prove to you why it's important to call them out for it, debating the spirit of the motion. What does it mean to call out China's actions? I think the calling out must come from a power that's superior, a power that's able to make China rethink their actions, which in this case, we settle with the international community. Calling out looks like making public political statements or releasing national news articles, as well as holding conferences to discuss the issue at hand. But here's my argument. Why is it an obligation that we must fulfill to call out China? Number one, we need to protect the interest of vulnerable nations. We agree that the world isn't perfect, and a lot of African countries and Southeast Asian nations are suffering out there. Uganda, Timor-Leste, South Sudan are just some examples out of the myriad of other countries who are still poor and underdeveloped. But when China comes in this situation, the reward that China gives is irresistible towards smaller countries, which makes them blind to all the traps and tricks that China has. As a more advantageous country, a country that does not suffer from water shortages or famine, here's where that collective responsibility to help our poorer and underdeveloped counterparts lie in. Secondly, what happens when we alarm these vulnerable nations? Once the problem is being identified, the solution comes in easily. When vulnerable nations are aware of the problem at hand, that China is on the road to neo-colonizing their nation, here's where they are more likely to take reactive measures. They are not going to easily accept billion-dollar loans from China. They are not going to easily sign unequal treaties that China hand out to them. Instead, every decision made by African countries is going to be made on mutual benefit, intelligently, and with full information. Government is fighting for a world, not where African countries don't receive help at all, but African countries receive help that mutually benefit China and themselves. There is no party that earn one benefit other than the other. Here's the conclusion of my speech. I prove to you that number one, our three criteria still stand. China dominates other countries economically, politically, and culturally. But secondly, as the international community, calling out is a responsibility to save African countries from the harm and suffering that might come to them. Ladies and gentlemen, 1/7 of the world's population is Chinese. Whether we like it or not, their growth is inevitable. If we stay dormant and not act, much like side of opposition, the world is not going to progress nicely. Side of government stands firm, and all of you should join us because we act in times of crisis for a world void of pain, suffering, and regret.
Thank you so much, Lokman, for your speech, already sounding like a credible economic analyst. Other than debating, he enjoys table tennis, and the person he admires most is his father. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to listen to the second speaker from the opposition, Mr. Danish Zuhairi. Please welcome.
Ms. Speaker, members of this honored hall, for hundreds of years, small countries in Africa and Asia have been tossed around by Western powers. Today, China comes initiating development projects and improvement projects in this country. So the government today stands up and accuses China of neo-colonialism. We, on opposition, are giving a chance to China to actually boost development in these countries that are in dire need and create a better tomorrow for all. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very pleasant morning I would like to bid to the Honorable Mrs. Speaker, esteemed timekeepers, worthy opponents, loyal teammates, and last but not least, members of this noble hall. So today, I stand strongly as the second speaker from opposition would like to do simple tasks. First of all, I will rebut what the government side has been saying, and secondly, I will give out my arguments under the keyword of development, and China does not actually do any forms of exploitation. So moving on into my rebuttals towards the government side. First of all, let's see what the Deputy Prime Minister had said. So the Deputy Prime Minister said that China is a neo-colonialist power by giving the example of the port of Gwadar in Pakistan. So they said that Pakistan leased the port to China because they cannot pay the debt to China. Let's see what actually happened in Pakistan. According to the Pakistani government, they already set a a treaty with China where when they cannot pay the debt, Pakistan would have to voluntarily lease the port to China. So when this case of Gwadar actually happens, it is not China who forced Pakistan to forcefully give the port to China, but Pakistan is the one who said that they would lease the port to China if they cannot pay the debt. So we cannot blame China in this case. It's because it's Pakistan's choice to actually lease the port to China. Secondly, they said that China targets countries that cannot pay their debt, and that is a predatory action. Let me give you a fact given out by the African Union that handles debts from China. They said that when China gives loans to African countries, they give, number one, loans with very low interest fees or almost non-existent fees in those loans. Number two, the countries which are least developed, China will exempt those countries from actually having the heavy loans. So this clearly shows how China is not actually predatory in action, and this clearly shows how China does not have the intention to make these countries in debt and make these countries bow to China. But before I move on, yes, please.
Please stop disapproving examples as a rebuttal. Instead, provide meaningful analysis and explain why there is a trend that China targets high-risk countries to give out loans.
The main reason why China is going to these countries which are underdeveloped is because China sees these countries as not being paid attention to by the IMF and World Bank. It's because IMF and the World Bank, they put strict rules to these countries where these countries need to have a stable economy, need to have good ways of life. Because of that, China sees this country that have potential, then China invests in this country because they say that the World Bank and IMF is not doing anything to actually help these countries to develop their own state. So China is actually doing a good thing to actually develop these countries. And they also said about forcing people in other countries to learn Chinese. That is not forcing, that is just like we are learning English. Why do we learn English? The English never forced us to learn English, but we ourselves want to learn English because we want to engage in trade with England, with America, with New Zealand and Australia. So this is the exact same case in Cambodia, in Myanmar, where the people voluntarily want to learn Mandarin because they want to engage in trade with China. So China never actually forced people to learn Chinese, but the people actually want to voluntarily learn Chinese. So moving to the next rebuttal against calling China as countries who are neo-colonialist, they said that when we call China neo-colonialist, then African countries will realize and they will actually run away from China. Let me explain the situation, what will actually happen when we call China a neo-colonialist power. So when we call China a neo-colonialist power, then countries will actually be fearful of China. And when they are fearful of China, they will want to search for other alternatives. And they see today, when they go to the US economy is failing. The EU economy is also failing because of internal conflicts. So they see that the only alternative that is reliable is China. And when they see that China is a neo-colonialist power, before China comes to their shores, they will voluntarily go to China. And when they voluntarily go to China, China's power increases. So in their case, it's when actually China's power increases and China will actually become a neo-colonialist and more superful power. So done with my rebuttals, I will move into my arguments today under the keyword of China brings actually development and not exploitation. So my point today will be discussing about the criteria of neocolonialism, which is exploitation. We will prove to you how in China's economic expansion in these countries, exploitation does not happen. So first of all, what is exploitation? According to Webster Dictionary, exploitation is when you treat someone unfairly to benefit from their work. So in this case, it's when China treats the undeveloped countries unfairly to gain and reap all the benefits. So it is when China takes all the resources and leaves these countries with nothing. So how do we actually measure exploitation? Exploitation happens, number one, when there is deprivation of local resources and a lack of local industries. And number two, huge economic outflow back to developed country, which is back to China. So we will prove to you how these does not happen in China's cases in Africa, thus proving that exploitation does not happen, thus proving to you how neocolonialism does not happen in China's economic expansion. No, thank you, I've already received POIs. So next, let me explain to you how deprivation of local resources does not happen. So what is deprivation of local resources? Actually, when a developed country i.e. China, they use methods like sending companies and agencies to these countries while they reap all the benefits for themselves, leaving no room for local industries to thrive. So in China's case, this does not happen. We can see clearly in African countries, for example, like in Kenya and Ethiopia, China's companies are present and China's companies do get benefit in these countries. But at the same time, Kenyan and Ethiopian companies still thrive because China still leaves room for local industries to thrive. So all of this information is actually information verified by Encyclopedia Britannica. Examples, today we can see, if you live in Africa, you can see large companies, for example, ShopRite Holdings, where they do food retailing businesses. So ShopRite Holdings is a company fully owned by an African, by billionaire Christo Weiss. So this clearly shows how China's presence in Africa does not exploit the African continent. Rather, they still leave room for local industries to thrive, and this shows that exploitation does not happen. Number two, the huge outflow of money back to China. So when China comes into Africa, they invest in infrastructure. And in the case of neocolonialism, all of this would actually give benefits and money back to China. So I will explain to you how by China's construction of infrastructure in Africa, it does not give huge outflow of money back to China. Let me give you the example of in Kenya, where China built the Nairobi-Mombasa Railway to connect the city of Nairobi and Mombasa, to connect the city and the port. So this railway actually creates more benefits to Kenya than it does to China themselves, because this railway is a high-speed railway, and then according to Kenyan's Minister of Trade and Minister of Finance, Kenya's GDP grew 10% each year, and it is the highest growing country in Africa. Tourism in Kenya tripled in the past 5 years, and trade flourished a lot in Africa after the construction of this railway. So this clearly shows how China's economic expansion benefits the host country more than it benefits China. So this is a proof that exploitation doesn't happen because huge economic outflow does not happen back to China. So before I conclude my speech, members of this floor, if you want a world where we would where we would together develop the undeveloped place of this world, go with opposition and don't go with government, because government is only creating propaganda and it's only creating suspicion that will actually not fix anything in this world today. With that, go with opposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danish, for his speech. Danish is also an avid reader, especially fictions, and his favorite author is J.K. Rowling. So he's a Potterhead, huh? Right, with that, I would like to invite the third speaker from the government team, Mr. Adil Arif. Please welcome. And a friendly reminder, as the third speaker of both teams, you're not allowed to put forward new arguments, only rebuttals.
The One Belt, One Road, otherwise known as OBOR, is one of China's major economic expansions. We say that OBOR is not a torch that can lead us to the future, but rather a flame that will destroy the peace of the world. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. I bid first of all to the honorable panel of adjudicators, thank you for taking the time to listen to me speak today. Mr. Speaker, fellow timekeepers, my utmost respect for facilitating this debate. Fellow debaters and spectators who have stayed with us thus far, welcome to the whip speeches of today's debate, the speeches with the most bark and even more bite. As a whip speaker of this team, I'll do two things for you today. First of all, I'll rebut all material coming from side of opposition before I bring forward two questions in this debate today. First of all, is China economic expansion actually neocolonialism? And secondly, is calling out China something that's beneficial? But before that, let's bring this debate back to its root, because it's becoming very confusing, especially when opposition wants to argue based on examples. What is the burden under both sides? On the government side, we will prove to you that first, China's economic expansion is neocolonialism, which we have done so under three criteria uncontested by opposition. And secondly, why it is beneficial to call out China as a neocolonist, also uncontested by opposition. We tell you that their burden falls. Their burden, and they want to prove to you, is only one, which is why it is not neocolonialism. They did not bother to debate the spirit of the motion, which is why something that's calling out is harmful, we think their case falls. Let's move on to rebuttals towards side of opposition. First rebuttal, towards the leader of opposition. He told you that China will develop these lands and will somehow create a giant economic power through investing in these other lands who have low economic power. This was also continued in the Deputy Leader of Opposition, which he rebutted the Pakistan examples because it's Pakistan's fault that they cannot pay back the loans in the first place. We do that first response. This is exactly what we want to argue and we want to prove to you in today's debate, that China is exploiting and entrapping these countries in the first place. The fact that they don't realize it proves how effective China's traps are in today's world. Second response, we tell you that the fact that China employs these types of moves is something that is something that China actively does in status quo. This is something that China is implementing towards these Indian countries, and this is different from other proper negotiations because China realizes that these countries cannot pay back the loans that they give. They realize that cannot pay back, and they continue to loan them money even though they cannot pay back. We think China is not thinking about other countries. China is only thinking about themselves. No, thank you, gentlemen. I'll take you before my issues. Next rebuttal. They also try to rebut to you on how learning English is something that is normal, as learning English is something like learning Mandarin towards something normal. We notice that they only rebutted the example and they never touched the premise of the argument that my Prime Minister brought to you, which is the premise considering the fact that these types of cultural impression is something that occurs through economic investment of China in the first place. We can bring to you many other examples. For example, the 996 work ethic that China brings from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night and 6 days a week. We think that types of work ethic is something that Chinese companies will bring when China brings their companies into Africa, when China brings their companies into other nations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something that they have to consider in the first place. Last but not least, rebuttal. They talk to you on how China will fear these types of accusations in the first place. We tell you that China is very open to negotiation. The fact that Malaysia itself could negotiate to reduce the price of the ECRL from $65 billion to $44 billion is something that shows China is open to negotiation, and it shows that China is a businessman that can propagate these types of changes. Before I move on to my issues, sure.
Everything that they said is inherent in any country that wants to economically develop, even without the intent of neocolonialism. Please prove how that is unique only in the case of neocolonialism.
Thank you for your interest. I believe I've already spoken about this, but let's entertain you nevertheless. We already told you that the difference between Chinese economic investment and normal economic investment is that China knows that and targets countries that cannot pay back. Notice that China continued to loan Sri Lanka money even though they noticed Sri Lanka cannot pay back that money in the first place. This is something that you never notice under your side. No, thank you, gentlemen. As much as I want to entertain you more, I have a responsibility to finish my speech to the audience. Let's move on to the two issues I have for you today. First of all, is China a neo-colonist to begin with? First issue, and we have proven to you under 3 points. First of all, economy. They try to argue that equal trade and understanding occurs, unilateral and bilateral trade discussions, and so on and so forth. First response, we tell you that this is a biased trade that occurs under China's side. Notice that China holds all the cards, and China is an advantageous scenario. China is someone that holds all the economic power in the world and is a rising power to begin with. Secondly, even if this does not apply, we tell you that China is gaining more than these other countries. This proves the fact that, first of all, Sri Lanka itself has given the port to China for 99 years. And secondly, China has also gained a military base in Djibouti. We're becoming one of the 15 countries that actually has a military base outside of the nations. We tell you that China is gaining much more and they are gaining very less compared to on the opposition side. Second part of this issue, which is the political aspect of this scenario. They tried to argue that China wants to gain ally, but never really gave us any types of analysis. No, thank you, sir. Their first response, we tell you that China is holding ransom towards these countries. Notice that in the UN general election, when certain African countries voted with China for the election, they get 1.8 times more national projects per year. Compared to countries that voted against China, they get 2.7 less projects from China every year. If one project can feed 1 million mouths in those countries, we tell you that's a major loss for countries, and that's a ransom that China holds against these countries. Second response, even if this does not apply, we tell you that long-term capitalism and reliance of China towards these countries, towards China, is something that China enforces in the first place. Notice that China is actually exactly imposing their will on these nations, because nations cannot run away from them. Nations have to pay back their debt, and when this reliance becomes too big, it becomes a downfall for them. Third issue on culture. They tell you no work ethic, but only responded towards the example of Mandarin workshops in the first place. We tell you have many other examples, and they never touched our analysis to begin with. The 996 working hour, and the fact that Cambodia has an increase in influx of Chinese individuals coming in to work in Cambodia. The fact that these Chinese individuals speak only Chinese and don't bother to learn the native language is a fact that these individuals are imposing the will on China. Second issue, briefly, is that the calling out is something that's beneficial. Notice that they never contested it, and my argument from my Deputy Prime Minister still stands at the end of the day. We tell you that it's very shameful for opposition to not notice this happening. We tell you it's very shameful for them to be kept in these types of clouds at the end of the day. Fiat sapientia virtus, otherwise known as manliness through wisdom, is the Malay College's motto. The best way to exhibit wisdom in this debate is to make the best and informed decision. And that decision you can only make on the government side. Thank you.
Wow, that escalated quickly. We can feel that the debate is heating up. And Adil, you might want to, get your BP checked as it is, yeah? So Adil, given a choice, would like to proceed his accountancy studies in the London School of Economics, LSE, and his current mentor in life and idol is our Prime Minister, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. So we'll see where the third speaker from the opposition team will bring the debate to. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Ahmad Luqman Muhammad Noor to begin his rebuttals. Please welcome.
Even though this is not a debate about facts, but every single fact that we gave was completely true and showed that Africa is trying to help these countries. They didn't read those facts, they didn't have the incentive to read that, and they couldn't disapprove anything that we said in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And standing as a third speaker, this is what I will do. Firstly, I'll give a few responses to the government side. Secondly, I'll compare and contrast and show the clashes that happened in this debate. And lastly, I'll give a comparative analysis on why we as the opposition side completely take this debate. So firstly, responses. Responses about the idea of calling out China. Why would we from the opposition side call out China? Firstly, we won't call out China because they simply don't do neo-colonialism. Why would you call a country that simply doesn't do neo-colonialism in the first place? And even though, let's say, we don't know if they do or not, we still wouldn't acknowledge them, because this is what will happen. When you acknowledge these countries, that when you say that China is doing neo-colonialism, you'll see that these countries will be very precautious to the extent where they can also boycott China. And what happens to countries in Africa? When they become too precautious of China's help, of China's economic development, when China pulls out, because you're being too precautious, because you don't want their help anymore, because you're saying that they're neo-colonizing your country, now that will be the point where Africa doesn't get any help anymore, where Africa will be deprived, thus actually creating a more detrimental world on the government side themselves. Firstly, and my second response is that they told you how China targets these undeveloped countries and only meticulously target these countries. You have to understand why they target these countries. Three responses. Firstly, they target these countries because other countries are already helped by IMF and the World Bank. So why in the world, in that case, you help a country that's already helped? It's better for you to find a country that's not helped the IMF by the World Bank. That is why they help these countries, because they're not initially helped anyway. And secondly, you have to understand that these countries, because they're underdeveloped, they have to develop. So it's inherent in any case that if they want to develop, they must take loans. And what is the best loaner in the world? China. Why? Because they don't have any interest rate. So even if China doesn't neo-colonize them, they will still take loans from China. We think that that is the case. It isn't just a simple case of China trying to neo-colonize these countries. And thirdly, you have to understand that countries such as Kazakhstan, they operate not through a democracy system. So they won't get any help from IMF, they won't get any help from World Bank because of the conditions put that if you want to get help from the World Bank, you must have a stable economy and you have to operate through democracy. So countries as Kazakhstan, where they have dictatorship, they won't be helped by World Bank. So we think it's a good initiative that China helps these countries develop these people and actually let food be on their table rather than depriving these countries from their certain rights. Before I continue, sure.
The reason why the organizations like the IMF and the World Bank doesn't help certain countries is because more often than not, those countries are dictatorships and have corrupt governments. How does supporting dictatorships and corrupt governments help people, like in the case of North Korea and Zimbabwe? Please justify all your arguments.
Okay, thank you. Let me tell you what happens if you don't help these dictatorship countries. So in the case where you don't help, where China doesn't give incentives to these countries, this will look like you have a country that is extremely deprived of resources because you have dictatorship. At least with the help of China, at least you can actually give food on your people because China is economically developing those people, even in the case of dictatorship. So we see in our world, even though let's say that country is still in dictatorship, but at least you will see a country where the people can actually live. Rather than their country, when you're actually depriving them, not giving them any help, firstly, they're under a dictatorship, and secondly, their people are deprived from any resources at all. Now, continuing with the clashes in this debate. Firstly, the first clash would be under the first metric that we gave. Does China exert power to these nations or not? What they gave, does China dominate these nations or not? Firstly, you have to understand that exerting power is a unilateral relationship where one side gets a lot of benefit and they don't really concede and don't have consensus from the other side. But what happens in the case of China? Let me tell you why it's way more multilateral, why it's way more bilateral. Multilateral, talking about BRI, the Belt Road Initiative. The Belt Road Initiative doesn't just benefit China, but rather it also benefit all the countries in the Belt Road Initiative. Kenya can now connect to Nigeria easily. Kenya can now connect to Mali easily. So in that case, you can see how these countries are prospering in their own. Not China neo-colonizing them, where you're limiting the resources that they have, where you're limiting their development. That is why colonialism means. And secondly, they talked about how the mutual benefits didn't balance out. They talked about how China will get way more benefits than these African or these host countries. Firstly, we think that's inherent because if a developed country does have an undeveloped country, of course they'll get more benefit. They're already rich in the first place. And secondly, we already see that actually Africa gets a lot of benefits, and that it will be clarified in my second class. So the second class is talking about, does China actually exploit these countries? Let me talk about economic exploitation. They talked about how China exploits these countries, and my second speaker had done a great job in telling you what exploitation is. Exploitation is when you take resources from these countries and leaving them with nothing. So this would look like where these countries lack in local industrial development. But what happens in China? Let me give you African companies. You have ShopRite Holdings. It's the most prominent company in China, and it's an African company. You have Nesper, internet and a media company in Africa. It's also owned by African owners. You have Bidcorp, you have Standard Bank Groups. All of these are African companies that develop and prosper more. If China was neo-colonizing these countries, then you would see that they lack local development because China is trying to put all their companies in Africa. You have to buy all of Chinese products. But you can see the prosperity of these local companies show that it can reach to an extent where Africa doesn't need China anymore because of the development of these local companies themselves. But if I continue, anybody?
China really wanted to help the world. Why must African financial aid come at the cost of them being loyal to China? Isn't that manipulation?
Okay, firstly, who said China who said that China wanted Africa to be loyal to them. What happens is that Africa appreciates and is loyal to China because they gave economical aid. Any single country that gives economical aid will be in that country's favor. We don't see how that is only unique to neo-colonialism. If you help a person, they will help you back. It's inherent. It's not saying that, for example, I had my first speaker, Muiz. I don't want his favor, but he will help me back. It's inherent in any case. You can't simply say that China does that, and because they want that loyalty, that is neo-colonialism. Because they aren't able to give the distinction of how economic development without the intention of neo-colonialism is different than neo-colonialism themselves. So let me give you a comparative on both worlds. So their world looks like where China is actually trying to help these countries. You're being so precautious by calling them neo-colonizing those countries, those host countries. So you'll create a world where people have negative narratives towards China, where people don't want China's help. But we think China is the best source of help, and just because somebody helps you, don't think it's something negative. We stand for China, and we stand for the prosperity of these people, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad Luqman, for his rebuttals. And there goes the last speaker. Ahmad Luqman's field of interest lies in psychology, and he specifically likes Dr. Brian Little. And Ahmad Luqman is also a Hufaz, having memorized the Holy Quran. With that, we've come to the end of the substantive speeches, and we'll take a break of 3 minutes to give room for both teams to prepare their reply speeches. So the 3 minutes start now. Thank you so much. All right, the bell has been rung twice, indicating the end of the 3 minutes break. So are you all ready to proceed? Opposition and government? All right. So to begin the reply speech session, I would like to invite the opposition team, represented by Mr. Abdul Muiz, to deliver his reply speech.
Madam Speaker, in today's world, in today's debate, there were two main things that both sides had to prove today. Number one, neocolonialism or not. Number two, to call out or not to call out. We say that on both of these things, side of opposition wins in this debate today. Now, first part here, neocolonialism or not. What were the metrics to determine if it was neocolonialism or not? Four parts here. Number one, economically. Number two, politically. Number three, culturally. And finally, exertion of power, which we agree to the government that they engaged with us. So here, let's begin with the first part that we need to prove. Economically, what did they say about being economically, the fact that, what did government say here today? Government told you that by giving loans and investments, China takes hold of these nations. We tell you that is wrong, because how else can these countries develop without the help of China? Because number one, these Chinas never receive any help from other nations. The fact that America currently doesn't give anyone any incentives to actually help these other nations. America doesn't develop other nations. The IMF and the World Bank didn't give any help to these nations. The fact that these nations had to take China's help because that was how they wanted to give better lives to their people. Thus, how is it that the side of government never told us, how is it that these countries can actually develop without the help of China? So let me tell you something. In terms of being economically better or not, in terms of being economically, is it neocolonialism or not, we tell you that just because China develops these nations, it does not mean that it is neocolonialism, because China wants to help these people, China wants to help those countries develop. Second part, politically. What did they say about this? They said that China is paying ransom to these smaller nations. They told you that by having China paying ransoms, these small nations would actually support China in the UN community. Let me tell you something that my third speaker told you. He told you that repaying interest, repaying debts, he told you that giving back what has been given to you is something inherently in all of us. The fact that we do good to people that do good to us. They told you that China, okay. So they do good to you, so we do good to them. So if these countries were never unable to receive benefits from other countries, but China reached out to them to help them, we say there's nothing wrong with these countries helping China. The fact that if other nations were to help those countries, that country would help other nations. We say that does not cater to the problem of neocolonialism. Thus, we prove to you why China does not actually neocolonize these countries. In terms of culture, they really never told us why is it that with a sudden influx of Chinese workers, that these people would suddenly abandon their own language, the fact that these people would suddenly abandon their own culture. They really never told you and gave any clear clarifications on that. Fourth part, in terms of exertion of power, I told you how is it that exertion of power can happen. It can happen unilaterally. But I told you also that, in the instance of China and these other nations, the communications that happen between them is bilateral and also multilateral. In the case of China investing in Africa, it is bilateral trade, it is bilateral communications. This is because China negotiates with these people, China and African states come to a consensus, shows that China does not exert any power on these smaller nations. Thus, it is not neocolonialism. So what did I tell you just then? I've told you that we have proved to you why is it that this is not a form of neocolonialism. Now let's move into the second part of what we needed to prove on our side. To call out or not to call out. What did we say on our side? We should not call them out because number one, it is not a form of neocolonialism. But let's assume that it somehow is a form of neocolonialism. What did we say on that? Why is it that we still should not call them out? We told you because once these nations were to know that China is colonizing them, they would opt out of the help that China gives them. This gives incredible harms to these countries. Because number one, a government never told you how is it that these countries can develop without the help of China. The fact that other institutions never tried to help China, the fact that they could only receive benefits, the fact that they could only economically develop with the help of China. The side of government told you that that wouldn't happen on that side. So let me tell you, they should not call out to China because these countries are able to develop and give better lives to their citizens. And because of that, we are proud to oppose the motion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul Muiz, for the reply speech, and that wraps up the opposition's case. And to conclude today's debate, I shall now call upon Mr. Lokman from the government's team to deliver the reply speech. Please welcome.
As you walk through the streets of Cambodia, you will stumble upon a temple, the biggest temple in Cambodia, with a huge lotus on its roof. But unfortunately, the lotus isn't the symbol of Cambodia. The lotus is a symbol of China. Like it or not, Cambodia has now become China's China. In my reply speech, I'm going to do three things. Number one, I'm going to compare the arguments on both sides of the House, analyze the clashes in this debate, and finally compare the stances. Let's take a look at the arguments that government provide you. The first thing that we told you was that we set the three criteria that define neo-colonialism. We told you that economic, political, and cultural exploitation was what defined, and we backed up by multiple examples. The second thing that we provided in our case was that we told you that we had a collective obligation to protect vulnerable states like Africa and other poor Southeast Asian nations. Opposition told you two things. The first thing they clarified was another criteria to neo-colonialism was China exerting power. If China did not exert power, then that does not count as neo-colonialism. The second thing they told us was that other countries also benefit. As long as other countries benefit, that is not colonization. What are the main questions in this debate? The first question you have to answer, is China really exerting power? We told you, yes, they do. Politically, culturally, as well as economically. Of course, it's not exerting power directly. We can't expect to travel back to the 19th century. But through subtle negotiations and oftentimes diplomatic manipulation, that is exactly what China is doing. And to deal with their concern that as long as we have other options to do so, that is not colonization. We agree that countries do have more than one option. But when that option is forced, coerced, manufactured, by all of the influences that China puts towards your country, that choice becomes a forced choice. And that is not willing to uphold the self-actualization of these countries. The third thing that they wanted to contest was that as long as we mutually benefit other countries, then that's fine. We will settle with what we have. But ladies and gentlemen, note that oftentimes treaties and agreements are never fair and are most times unequal. When Malaya benefited by seeing the new construction of banks and economic areas when the British came in, we benefited, but that still counted as colonization. Because apparently, colonization is not about what you gain, but what other countries are doing to you and the impacts that we can see. As long as we lead to the second question, whether or not we should call out China for their actions. And here's where government wins this issue clearly. Because the only contention coming from opposition is that countries are going to fear China's economic expansion. I don't think this is a problem. It's what you're fearing is 99 years of debt and having to pay back the loans to China. If what you're fearing is your culture losing out to a lot of your native speakers learning Mandarin, then I think that's something that you should fear. But my whip clearly told you that China isn't someone to play a game of politics. Rather, they are very business-minded and straight to the point. If you tell them that there are any unsatisfactory points in our agreements, they will concede and they will try to fix themselves. Even our finance minister, Lim Guan Eng, himself noted that China is a great partner, and if any problem arises between us, we will be able to solve it. What are the stances on both sides of the house? I think here is where the pragmatic harms can be seen. Because under government, the future is not a future where African countries stay poor and underdeveloped. Rather, in initiating any economic deals or any economic alliances, that choice is going to be made with full intelligence and full information. Not in a world where that choice is clouded and veiled by all the tricks and traps that China sets for them. Ladies and gentlemen, I might stop speaking now, but I hope my voice that echoes throughout this hall carries Malaysia's spirit, Kenya's spirit, and all other countries who have been colonized before. We have braced colonialism, and we will do it again. MCKK has won PPM before. Inshallah, we will do it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that, it concludes today's debate, and we have heard the arguments and points raised by both teams, the government and the opposition. We have been entertained by their ideas and credible characters. And before the result is announced, I would like to call upon all the adjudicators to proceed to the Secretariat Lounge to confer on the best speaker. I have to admit today is a dream come true for me, because after 14 years of waiting, I am finally on the final stage of the Prime Minister's Trophy Challenge, as I was once also a participant, and therefore I have a huge appreciation, and I totally understand all the blood, sweat and tears that both teams had to go through to be here on stage today. So a big round of applause to both teams. It took them a lot of effort, a lot of heartbreak, I'm sure, along the way, but they persevered, and here they are. We can see the future leaders of the country. So with that, I would like to thank all the team members and timekeepers for their participation in this debate, and the results will be announced during the closing ceremony. So please stay and join us later for the next session. And with that, brings us to the end of the final of the 46th Prime Minister's Challenge Trophy English Language Debate 2019. As a speaker, I would like to thank you for being here with us today. We adjourn till the closing ceremony. I now invite both teams to step down. I'm Putri Mahira signing off. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Putri Mahira. Congratulations to all debaters for the heated and entertaining debate.
Para hadirin yang dihormati, dengan berakhirnya bahas Bahasa Inggeris sebentar tadi, maka selesailah sudah pertandingan akhir Piala Perdana Menteri kategori Bahasa Inggeris kali ke-46. Untuk makluman para hadirin, keputusan pertandingan dan majlis penyampaian hadiah kepada para memenang akan disampaikan selepas selesainya pertandingan akhir bahas Bahasa Melayu yang akan diadakan selepas ini. Seterusnya, hadirin yang dihormati, bagi meredakan suasana pertandingan serta debaran peserta bahas,